So here we are in the podcast studio. It goes on, as I said, from across the ecosystem, everything from new brands and new comebacks and new ways to look at data. Let's turn it around. Let's flip the script quite literally, because my next guest is going to do exactly that. Paul Meinshausen from Aampe. You are, for me, one, I've been following your company for a long time, I think since possibly day one. What comes through as a thread throughout this is that this is not just a company. This is new DNA, Paul. How does that happen?
Very serendipitously, accidentally, opportunistically. Yeah, I think if I had asked myself where I'd be 5 years ago, right around when my last company was we were wrapping up the acquisition, I would not have expected to be in Vegas, not have expected to be at MAU. And I'd never heard of MAU, even though I'd worked in mobile apps for 10 years or so. But I kind of followed a thread. I've met a lot of new people doing what I knew was important work. Mm-hmm. And what became more and more important to me was that there was this big disconnect between the way we were designing machine learning and how AI was evolving and what this area of work, which is incredibly important for us as people who use apps. I think if we oftentimes we think of ourselves as app builders, app marketers. Mm-hmm. But you walk up and down the strip here in Vegas and you just see all the people coming from all over the US, from all over the world. Yeah. And they're ultimately the people who are using apps and trying to achieve, whether it's, get back from Vegas and go for a run, or, play games, or, decide what to watch, et cetera, et cetera. I was just watching, had it on TV this morning, CNBC was on, they were talking about the Disney boardroom battles, and how important the app was to the future of Disney versus linear television. So how do we make technology better for them? And there's this big disconnect between the world I know of building machine learning and the world of folks who are here at this conference and who run so much of the functions of it within all of the consumer apps that we're talking about. That just kind of pulled us in, and we just realized we needed to build tech for that could be used by marketers, but that would be ultimately making a better experience for end users.
So the disconnect, is it simply that you can boil it down to the earlier models, the earlier thinking, rules for one, it helped organize, but ultimately it also limits what we're doing because we are people and we don't follow rules, but the apps and the marketing do.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it's a problem of you have waves of technology and then lags of adoption. And then when you have waves catching other waves with the adoption lagged even further behind, in a sense, I think it's important to learn how to move and drop certain kinds of technology faster. It's not like a passive thing. You have to actively remove it from your stack in order to enable some of the newer kinds. Okay. I think, there's a term that goes around a lot these days, composability, and how do you take the best of all these different worlds? And when you actually look at, this is what I mean, when you actually look how organizations make these kinds of decisions, there's anybody who's here from a consumer app team this week, right? You've got lots of vendors trying to speak to them. What I've learned over the last couple of years is that they are only one part of a decision of whether to use a particular technology. Mm-hmm. And so you're not, having a conversation with them and then closing up a deal and kind of helping them move forward. No, they're going to go back home and then they're going to talk to their data team and their tech team and their product team and all the other folks, and they have to be along for that journey. And what that means is that they have to start to be selective. They can't just take the best of everything because they have to ask, well, how does this get interpreted or used or facilitate some other team? And so, when you were kind of introducing this, right, I think where some of the hard truth comes in is sort of asking ourselves, how do we retire certain parts of our stack in an active way? Yeah. It's not just like So there's that, and then there's also just what are we moving towards in terms of what does a better future look like?
So everything needs to be fluid. I mean, we learned that big time through the pandemic. We learned that, nothing is static. Everything is changing, and everything we thought we knew about demographics and people, you could just throw that out because we were different. And if you thought you could understand us by our location, we weren't going anywhere. So, there were different signals, different ways of looking at people, going beyond demographics. And that also challenged some models as well. Where do you see that if you had to give marketers, I'll just say marketers, but it's product, it's marketing, it's data, it's actually 3 or 4 personas that you're talking to. We don't actually talk to app marketers alone anymore. That's why I just say the organization. Give some advice to the organization, tough love. Let's go through that stack. What would they have to rip out or at least think about removing forcefully first?
It is a very tough choice, and there's a lot of risk assessment involved. But I think as much as ripping out, it's also just sort of rapidly replacing. If you're ripping out, then I'd say a lot of existing legacy campaigns that you've set up over the years, that you invested time in, day 1 campaigns, day 13, sales, you've just programmed a lot of, let's say you're using something like a Braze, all those canvases, all of those campaigns. Those are really just sort of sitting in your stack, sending out messages that are well past their due by date. And they're cluttering up the space, and you're not learning actively from them. And so that would be an example.
So like those straight campaigns that have always been there because they're part of the legacy, part of the fabric static, of what you do.
Non-dynamic, they're just set it and forget it kind of a thing. Yeah, absolutely. Those is a good place to do it. But I think also thinking about all those different pipes that take data from one place to another, to another, to another. And when you look at it from a data perspective, data team thinks about their data platform. They've already done a lot of that work. It's just that they're so disconnected from the marketing team that the marketing team thinks, well, I've got my tool and I need to be able to set it up. And so I need to have certain events tracked, which is a subset of your total events. And I need, this and this and this. And so they'll come in, and then you'll have a vendor come in and say, well, we need to be able to have access to that event. And so they set up those pipelines. And that just doesn't make any sense. It's so much duplication, which causes so many downstream negative sort of effects, externalities of that, because you're now tracking 2 different events. And so if you want any other team to take your attribution seriously, or your incremental impact on the company when you're kind of cycling that into the CFO, well, you got to resolve all these different events, where they're being tracked, where they're being sent. So you end up with a lot of measurement problems, which means you got to staff up a huge BI team or analytics team, and it's very expensive. It doesn't make any sense because that data has already been generated by the data team. It's just that your system wasn't built to handle all of it. And so
it's almost like the more you want to make it accessible through all these different pipes, you're setting yourself up for more complexity in the end.
Absolutely. And the thing is, though, is that the pipes that are just moving it around, that are dumb, they have a job to do now. And it's not just moving data around. It's actually evaluating its weight on a given metric. It's evaluating whether it's actually doing a good job, whether that data is needed. I think, we're only 10 years into the whole move to the cloud. And so that changed a lot of people's infrastructure. That changed. And initially it was sort of a zero interest world. And you could sort of say, well, pass the data here, pass the data there. And now people are realizing, again, they're spending on moving the data. They're spending on storing it in different places. And then they're actually not being able to action it, because then they have to spend on people doing the analysis and the intelligence in order to make a value of it. So you've piled up costs on top of costs on top of costs. And at the end of that whole process, you haven't actually used much of the data that you moved and stored and processed.
And perpetuating one of the myths, since you're...
And then there was the mess.
The myth of it's in the data. The answers are always in the data. I mean, you'll be hearing lots of presentations over the next couple of days at Mal. It's all in the data. What does that make you do, Paul?
Cringe. Yeah, it's...
Why is that?
Because there's a lot of things. One is that most of the data you use, most of the data you track and connect, you'll never be able to use it in the way that the today's stack is built to be used. It requires manual analysis, segmentation. It's trigger development. That doesn't scale, and that's not how the data is really reflected, in the sense that you're looking for big levers that you can pull that will cause an impact, whereas what you really have is lots of tiny little signals that are relevant for a very small microsegment. Mm-hmm. And so unless you can do that somehow algorithmically, you have a losing battle. But also because the half-life of data is very short. What that means is like what you ate for lunch 2 months ago is not really predictive of what you're going to eat for lunch tomorrow versus what you ate for lunch a week ago, et cetera. So the value of historical data degrades very quickly. How do you stay current and learn from it? And then how do you make the decision of what the threshold and the cutoff is? And again, that's just another example of a non-manual. It's not a manual thing you can analyze and then come to a conclusion on. And increasingly, software can do that job. Intelligent software can do that job and needs to, freeing you up to do a lot of other things. And that ultimately is what gets me very excited, is that there's so many important things marketing teams should be doing with their time. And they're not, because they're doing all that conventional historical stuff of sort of the traditional
stack.
Is
it like mindset or tool set? Because when I read a lot of what AMP puts out, you have some very forceful, some very interesting blogs and statements that are just, flying in the face of our preconceived notions and what we hold to be true. And so I wonder, is it a tool problem or a mindset problem? Because it seems to be a little bit. Yeah, I was going to say
it's both.
Okay.
It's both. The reason is because ultimately a tool problem is always really a capability and an output problem. In other words, the tool is not good because it doesn't have the capability required for you to get the output that you want. But doing the process of evaluating, looking at that, deciding that that's the case and what you need, et cetera, requires some investment of attention and awareness. Mm-hmm. And to have that intention and awareness and effort, mental effort to put in to recognize the limitation of your tools requires you to have the mindset that you don't already know all the answers, that you haven't set up the stack so many times, and so that you know exactly what you need and the best of breed or what you already have. And the technology, and that's what I mean by the lag, it has changed so fast that folks, who really earned their spurs and grew up in the last, 5 or 8 years, already a lot of what they learned is actually not the case anymore. Yeah. And so they have to have the mindset of a little bit of humility, a little bit of ambition to say, humility in the sense of, look, things we may be sure we know. I so often hear folks will be like, I've done this for 8 years. I know what consumers want in this space, or I know what my app users want in that space. And it's like, I was just talking to our mutual friend Stacy from CashKick, and she was giving me an example of that from someone she'd spoke to, and we were just like, and then she's like, but then we looked at the data and it wasn't that case. It wasn't right, and that is just a perfect example of it. But then ambition in the sense of that, okay, we've been doing it this way for 5 or 8 years or whatever. It can be so much better. Yeah. It's not, what you have is not the best of what's possible. You have to have that aspiration to really grow faster and to be able to do more. And that means, again, looking at what the tools available are, and then making smart choices about how to experiment with them, how to try them out. And being challenged. I mean, we hear and we will hear at Mal, it's all in the data, but you have a presentation as well. What are you saying? What are you doing to sort of just open the aperture of how, I'll just say marketers, but different personas out there, of how they think about this? Because it has to start somewhere. What is your point in your talk to start that conversation? It's a mutually reinforcing lesson that happens on both sides. And what I mean is that we have to use data differently than we have in the past. So that's that message, that moving it from here to there, and then manually setting up a journey based on a series of events that you've tracked using the SDK of the vendor that you use. Because you still don't know if they're the right events. Yeah, exactly. Right. Know. So doing that is definitely wrong, and you can do it better, and you need the tool. And it doesn't mean that you should learn a different way of doing it. It's not like a different manual process. It's not like, segment this way versus that way. The whole process is wrong. It doesn't scale. Mm-hmm. So there's a better way. At the same time, it is also true that the data that everyone looks to and says, we track and we use and we have, that's so rich is actually extremely thin. It's not nearly as good as you thought.
That's a hard truth for people to swallow.
It's a very hard truth. But our interfaces, our UIs, our apps, our messaging can actually generate so much better data. And if you think about it from a precision of almost any kind of app today, what you're really trying to do is help people find value faster. Yeah. So if you're trying to watch something, the problem is there's a million movies. Yeah. And which one is going to give you satisfaction for 45 minutes or an hour and a half? Right. It's a selection problem. Same with food. There's so much good food in the world. You only eat one lunch.
Yeah.
How do you make that decision that's going to help you achieve your goals? That maybe they're dietary, maybe they're fitness related, maybe they're pleasure related, maybe they're experience and memory related. And that's true at any app. Gaming, books, mental fitness, running. You're making a choice out of a lot of things.
Right.
And if you look at how, as humans, we interact with each other and help each other make better decisions. Like if I told you about good food to eat, for dinner tonight, and I give you a recommendation, or if I told you about a great movie I watched on the plane coming from Singapore, I wouldn't tell you I watched this amazing comedy drama from 2015. That would be right. We use human language, so we saw this really this bleak, gritty black comedy that really cuts you because it speaks certain truths, but it also makes you laugh in that painful way. We're using rich vocabulary.
But we're not using rich vocabulary.
In our app interfaces, we're not using rich
messaging.
vocabulary. Yeah. And in our messaging, we're not using rich vocabulary. We're speaking extremely generically. We're speaking from a very limited inventory that just sort of says, well, I'm going to recommend it because of the year and the genre, adventure, action, none of that other stuff, right? Yeah. But we actually can program our apps. We can generate our apps. We can use Gen AI to help us generate in a way that is so much more specific, so much more rich. And if you present rich information to someone and then you observe their response, you can learn rich insights about them. And so the data you get when you learn that somebody likes gritty movies or loves Italian food because it reminds them of the study abroad that they did in college and has all this associated memory, or because their grandmother in New Jersey made pasta in a particular way. That's a connection and a profile of that user that's so much richer than the fact that they've ordered Italian 3 times. Yeah. Because that's all we have in our event stream data. That's all we know is that they clicked on it and they bought it.
Yeah.
That's not that much.
We're not even knowing why they didn't buy it.
And we don't know why they didn't buy it because we didn't systematically offer them something else that would have given them a better alternative, and then track, how they respond to that alternative. Yes. So everything about our data is still very early. It's still very unsophisticated, very naive. It's just, it doesn't replicate the way we learn as humans, but that's what we want AI to do. That's what we want software to do, is replicate so much more of what we do as humans. So that means just evolving the way we build apps and the way we market them, and continue to engage with people. So
people talk about conversational commerce and engagement. It needs to be a conversation. And talking with you, I'm just thinking that currently where we are is probably along the lines of, would you like more fries with your fries? Is what I'm thinking the whole time. It's like, that's how exciting it is sometimes. In fact, I have a rant against Spotify. I'm starting to become disappointed because I listened for a while to a certain genre. I was having my dark, moody period. And now it's like dark, moody, and everything is dark, moody. And it's like, it's summer coming, spring. I don't want dark, moody, but they won't stop because serendipity is out the window. And marketers are probably missing out on a lot of opportunities because they aren't growing their campaigns with me as a person.
That's right. And there's so much explore that you have to do to learn those changes and maintain responsiveness. And that's what I meant by the half-life, right? As you shift, you have this moving window where what you've been listening to is really informative, but even like a personal assistant won't know that you've moved until you start to actively move, and then they will just be able to catch up faster. And that's what our technology can do as well. And then as you start to shift the amount, you manually go in and decide, no, I want to listen to something more uplifting, more joyful. And then you observe that change and then you adapt to it, right? And that's what I mean, is that the half-life is you want to pay more attention to what you've listened to in the last couple of days than what you've listened to in the last 2 weeks, because you've only just started to shift from the gritty or, bleak or kind of more somber music.
So in a way, what AMP is trying to do is it's not trying to, but if I think about it in that way, it's about equipping the adaptive marketer and the adaptive campaigns. It's very much a learning reinforcement. It's not just about doing things a bit better or scaling it a bit more. It's something about, I think, creating a cycle here. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, it's sort of saying we just need the loop to be closed within the technology itself, so that it can learn basic things. If the human has to stay there in the process, manually looking at your data loaded into Looker or some manual data dashboarding tool that's a sort of high level aggregate summary, and then turn around and do something based on it, you just will never catch up, especially.
And that's where we are right now.
And that's where we are right now, right? And that just doesn't work.
Frustrating.
Yeah. Whereas, and then their own creativity is being sublimated and just suppressed because they're just catching up with the day-to-day process that they have to do and constantly, and then they're trying to hire somebody, but then it's so much work to hire somebody, and then so they're spending all their time in hiring. And again, they're just constantly not spending their time in thinking creatively and more strategically, where there's so much work to be done. And what we want AMP to do is to enable them to do that while just solving a lot of those learning processes that can be done by software now. It's just that the older versions of software don't do it, and they're stuck, and they can't move fast enough. And so we're stuck, with those capabilities because we're not able to make a big choice or a big decision or really look past.
And it gets to be self-limiting in a way, because
extremely self-limiting.
Because marketers aren't achieving their potential because what they have to do is accept some hard truths, accept some things, and maybe not strip them out, but be prepared to do them very differently.
Yeah.
So what does an ideal, I wouldn't say an ideal marketer, but what does an ideal scenario look like? I mean, it's possible.
Yeah.
You have part of the tech that makes it possible. Another part is the mindset. So it's not just the technology,
That's right.
It's the mindset. Put that all together for me and help me understand how it could work right now if marketers would just open up, again, the aperture of how they see this.
I think both this podcast and this event are good examples of how marketers do stay current, do stay open to new things and evaluating new things. It's right. Like they can't be expected to just know it all. They have to have a learning access, right? So I think that's why we've been trying to contribute to this conversation, why we enjoy so much of your material, why we are pretty active on LinkedIn, is because that part of the conversation is important to allow people to gain access, et cetera. The second piece is that we explicitly chose to build AMP in a very open and connective way. And so we built it to not require you to rip out stacks, not require you to make huge choices, be open to the possibility of those, but you can run much faster by just, we took an API first approach. We said, well, look, there's amazing things that a lot of the stack do solve for, a lot of your data technologies do solve for. So amazing. You've got Braze in place, you've got Iterable in place.
Just supercharge
run
it.
Those exactly. You connect AMP as a way. We can easily connect and then replace a lot of those rules with reinforcement learning. And then the longer term, question of how your stack evolves, I think is something you can know, right? And that's okay. And you build into the future as you see results and as the economy changes and the broader landscape of technology changes. And so I think, but what you are making a decision is that I'm not reevaluating my stack every 2 years. I'm running POCs, I'm running pilots, I'm trying things, quarterly along the way. And that's allowing me to make better choices strategically about what a full stack implementation needs to look like, at those key junctures where there's company appetite to do that, where there's, big, you're making a big choice. I'm a big believer, chunk into smaller choices. So those are things I think that marketers can do very quickly. And I think a lot are doing that, right? Like that's so much of the prosumer type technology, like, ChatGPT, where what are ways you can experiment with using that in order to kind of help you with some of your copy, or labeling or other associated work, and bring that into your process and workflows.
So it is about aiming and reaching for objectives, and marketers, they're already in that place. They're thinking about what they can do, and it can be iterative, it can be step by step, and they're already exploring. But it's always cooler to sort of know what is possible. Now, you work with a number of really cool companies, also in APAC, where they're thinking differently about this, to their credit, as usual. Give me an example, if you can, or something where it's like, this is what you can aim for, this is what you can achieve, this is the possible.
Yeah.
Because that helps shape strategies and visions.
Yeah, so there's this really cool fashion app in Southeast Asia called Zalora, and the pace and rapidity with which they've explored interfaces, live streaming and chat UIs and different forms of collaborative, like collective shopping experience are pretty cool, pretty amazing.
Okay.
The complexity, I think, of Southeast Asia, where you've just got so many languages and such a large population in a dense area, but with very fluid borders. And so there's a cool travel app that uses this called Traveloka, and how they're thinking about Gen AI and how they're thinking about engaging and serving the travel experience. So that, and I think this is actually true for a lot of apps, is they're facing a point where you have to realize that most of the job to be done for your users is thinking and making a decision and evaluating and exploring. I think traditionally it might be called shopping versus buying.
Yeah.
And increasingly apps have been collapsing into the problem of, not increasingly, it's just been true always, that they serve the final stage, they serve the transaction.
Yeah.
But you use Google and you use review sites and you use other things to actually make your decision, and then you just go there and execute a choice, which means that application doesn't know anything about your preferences or how those preferences evolved, or what the trade-offs you were considering, because you did it on a different platform. We want more of that choice process to be done in the same application in which you do the transaction, so that it can get better, it can facilitate the choice. And in so many cases, the alternative is just not doing it, which is a much less rich and fulfilling life. It's so amazing to travel in Southeast Asia. For many people, it's an accessible thing now, as the economies have grown, as people have gotten better off. But it's also easy to sit at home and watch Netflix. And so the problem on both ends is usually a decision overload problem.
Yeah.
And so, if you're looking for a particular thing in terms of a hotel, you don't want to look at 100 hotels before you make a decision, because you want a good recommendation, and you want it to be contextually aware of what you care about. You're traveling with your family, you need something that's family friendly, that has a playroom, that has the things that you care about. If you're traveling, with a couple of friends and you're in your early 30s and you're looking for a party, you're looking for a very different experience. Yeah. So how can the application serve that? I think some Traveloka is doing really cool things. Yeah. So On Demand is doing a food delivery app called Swiggy, and one of the largest two in India, and just really thinking very creatively about how you can help people make really effective decisions in terms of what they're eating, and in terms of how food's such a critical role in our lives, right? And so we can enrich our interfaces, we can enrich our data, then those can feed into each other. I'm very optimistic about the world in a way. There's things that are troublesome about technology for sure. But I think it's not just like, the more we use our phones, the worse off we are. No, in many ways, phones have been dramatically positive. And we can make them more positive. We can help deal with some of the negative problems. And some of those negative problems have to do with marketing. Yeah. Really terrible, spammy, generic marketing, right? Yeah. We can do better. So let's just do better. Let's build better tech, and we'll have better lives.
There's something very positive in that, because it's true. It's all about the marketing, not the marketer, but what we've been doing, the generic sort of plain vanilla stuff. And it has to get better, because if it doesn't get better, well, someone else will come in Or some app
That's
will,
right.
some app will
That's
nail
right.
it. Look what Amazon did when
Yes,
it came in with
yes.
recommendations.
Absolutely.
So you get what's happening here. The smart ones will win.
Yeah, that is absolutely the case. It's not really a question. It's just a sort of a question of who adopts and who wins for how long.
Yeah, maybe just leave on a quick thought of your own. You're here, you're checking out now, you're meeting with marketers, prepping for your own talk. What is your impression of where they are in the learning curve?
I'm excited. We were setting up our booth and I was walking around. I definitely see a big change in the terminology and some of the companies I'm seeing, even compared to last year.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of wrote a post after I flew out of Vegas last year about what I saw. And in some ways, I think I was really on the money. I think, and I am seeing some of those things play out in terms of changes and adoption. But the other thing is, if you're not here, the conversation is still happening.
Yeah.
Ping us on LinkedIn, on Twitter, X, email. Happy to have the conversation. That's really what it's about at this point, is having conversations and chatting through things and being open-minded and exploring what's possible. Really cool things with generative AI and with other aspects of AI. So I think the biggest thing is just be part of that conversation, be willing to participate, be open to it, listen to your podcast. I think you're talking so many good things. And
excellent. I like that. It all starts with conversation. Everything starts with conversation.
Right. Yeah.
Change starts with an idea.
That's right.
And thank you for sharing your ideas. And yes, I will continue to be watching what you put out, because you've got some of the coolest, edgiest, and educational posts that I read. I enjoy them. And you do tell it as you see it. And we'll see next year what you get from Mal this year, because you might be like the bellwether, this way of telling where we're going. Thanks again, Paul.
Thank you, Peggy.